This text is a doozy. I feel a little bit better because Pastor Alice came up to me before worship and she says, "Please tell me you're not excited about preaching on this text." And I said, "No, I am not." And she said, "Good, because I'm preaching on it tonight and I'm dreading it." It's the illusion of all illusions. Stuff. Wealth, money, possessions. And I think it's an illusion because it takes up so much space in our lives, literal space, filling our houses and our cars and our wallets and purses. It also fills up space in our brains and our hearts. Causes anxiety about the future. Will we have enough money? Do we have enough money? We can fall into the trap of thinking that if we have one more thing or this shiny new toy that we will finally be happy. And so it's an illusion because the more stuff we get, the more our lives seem to be full. But that can really cloud our vision because it could be that our heart is actually quite empty and we don't even know it. That's not always the case, but it could be the case. Now, the late comedian George Carlin has this great monologue bit about our obsessive accumulation of material things and the modern anxiety for which it is both the cause and the result. Here's part of the bit. You got your stuff with you? I'll bet you do. Guys, you have stuff in your pockets. Women, you have stuff in your purses. Guilty as charged. My purse is like a suitcase. Then there's all the stuff you have in your car. You got stuff in your trunk, too, like lots of different stuff. Spare tires and jacks, tools, old blankets, an extra pair of sneakers, just in case you wind up barefoot on the highway some night. Stuff is important. You got to take care of your stuff. You got to have a place for your stuff. That's what life is all about, trying to find a place for your stuff. And that's what a house is, a place to keep your stuff. If you didn't have so much stuff, you wouldn't need a house. You could just walk around all the time. And a house is just a pile of stuff with a cover on top. You can see this when you're in an airplane taking off. You look down and you see all the little piles of stuff with all the little covers over the stuff and all the little fences around the stuff. Everybody got his own little pile of stuff. So now you have a house full of stuff, and even though you might like your house full of stuff, at some point you got to move. Probably because you got to get a bigger house. Why? Too much stuff. And that means you got to move all your stuff. Or maybe put some of your stuff in storage. Storage? Imagine that. There's a whole concept, a whole industry based on keeping an eye on other people's stuff. And it's locked up in these little rooms. Some of them have air conditioning, just waiting around for a rainy day when someone might need it. I mean, some people don't have shelter, but our stuff has shelter and has AC. He goes on to talk about how when we travel, we overpack. Again, guilty as charged on that one. But then concludes the bit with this. By the time you get home, you're pretty fed up with all of your stuff and all the problems it creates. And so about a week later, you decide to clean out your closet and the attic and the basement and the garage and the storage locker and all the other places you keep your stuff, and you get things down to manageable proportions. Just the right amount of stuff to lead a simple and uncomplicated life. And that's when the phone rings. It's a lawyer. It seems your aunt has died and left you all her stuff. What are you going to do now? Right. Well, you do the only thing you can do, the honorable thing. You tell the lawyer to stuff it. Now, we can laugh at this anecdote, but there is so much truth in this bit by Carlin. We are obsessed with stuff. The brands of stuff we have, the quantity of it we have, the ways we protect it and store it, and even the anxiety and time we spend to sometimes actually get rid of it. Those of you who have been through the downsizing exercise, you know what I'm talking about. And for many of us, it may not be the monetary value of our stuff that we struggle with, but it's the sentimental value that we struggle with. But both of those are idols in and of themselves. I mean, greed is kind of an anxiety about the future. We want more and more. Well, sentimentality is sort of a sin of the past, right? Both of those keep us from living in the present where God calls us to live with the needs that are right in front of us, the people who are right in front of us, the priorities that are right in front of us. Like Carlin's monologue, the parable Jesus tells us today portrays a situation of tragic absurdity. Now, we can see the absurd abundance in this man's life pretty clearly because it's not us, right? But just as we're patting ourselves on the back saying, thank God I am not like him, I have to say, Calvary, I am like him. I like my stuff. I like that it's mine. I feel like I earned the money for it, and I bought it. I like my red high heels, my closet of options of clothes, my books and my puzzles, my multiple rooms in my house where I can sit on this couch or a different couch, or maybe this room where the sunlight comes in a little bit better. It doesn't feel like greed or wealth or materialism to me, but it is. I can't look at my closet full of clothes or my multi-room house and think otherwise. I have more than I need. And again, the reason this is a struggle is because I like the stuff I have, and I want it. And it doesn't feel unchristian for me to have the stuff that I have. I don't feel abundantly rich or like I'm abusing money. But I thought a lot about this week. And I'm wondering if it doesn't feel unchristian because I've normalized a lot of the values in our American culture to become Christian in my mind. Because when I read the Gospels and listen to Jesus, to Christ, I have to admit, my accumulation and love of stuff may not be unchristian as the world defines it, but it is definitely unchristlike. I live a very different life than Jesus lived. Jesus is not materialistic in the least, and I am. And I don't want to be, but I am. So, just a warning, I've been sitting with this parable all week. You might have just heard it for the first time today. This sermon might make you uncomfortable. It makes me very uncomfortable. Mostly because I don't know where it leaves me or where to go from here. But let's dive in together and see where it takes us. The story goes like this. A man approaches Jesus and asks him to arbitrate a dispute that he's having with his brother. Tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. This sounds like a reasonable request. After all, the guy is not asking to inherit more than his brother. He just wants Jesus to advocate for basic fairness. But here's how Jesus responds. Take care, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Wait a second, Jesus. Hold on. Since when is desiring fairness the same thing as being greedy? If that's not distressing enough, Jesus keeps going, telling his listeners a parable about a rich landowner who carefully stores his wealth ahead of his retirement, only to learn that his life is about to end. You fool, God says. This very night your life is being demanded of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? Okay, but Jesus, come on, what's wrong with planning ahead? with saving for a rainy day, with making prudent choices when it comes to wealth management. But wait, there's more. Jesus concludes the parable with another warning. So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich toward God. What does that mean? What does it mean to be rich toward God? Professor Debbie Thomas remarks, these are all hard and uncomfortable questions. And maybe the best we can do is wrestle with them. But for me, the biggest takeaway from this week's gospel lesson is this. I need to stop assuming that my nearest and dearest concerns are also the nearest and dearest concerns of Jesus. That was sucker punch number 1 for me this week. She continues saying, like the man who seeks arbitration in the matter of his inheritance, I'm a stickler for equality and fairness. Jesus isn't. Jesus cares way more about us being generous than being fair. Like the rich man in the parable, I tend to think that I'm entitled to do what I want with my hard-earned money. Jesus doesn't seem to agree. Jesus knows that all that we have is God's to begin with, not ours. Like both men, I tend to compartmentalize my life into convenient secular and sacred realms, such that loving my brother or my sister or my neighbor as myself has little bearing on my totally reasonable legal pursuits, and that contemplating my mortality doesn't really require me to compromise my 401k. Again, she says, Jesus sees things differently. Where I see in part, Jesus sees the whole. Where I see what's pressing along the surfaces of my life, Jesus sees the depth of my heart. And where I obsess over the personal and the temporal, Jesus fights hard for the collective and the eternal. You can see that as Jesus looks at this rich landowner, reveling in his hard work and his barns of grain, just in the way the story is told, he sees that the man is self-absorbed, right? He's enamored with himself. Just listen to the pronouns in this. I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and I will store all my grain and my goods, and I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for yourself and for many years, so relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Me, myself, and I. In this carefully curated narrative of a proud, self-made man, Jesus is showing us perhaps a more isolated and insecure soul who has forgotten to nurture human connection, who maybe has never known that his wealth comes from God's generosity and God's provision, who maybe has forgotten that when we possess things, we are to be good stewards of them, and maybe has forgotten that in the face of death, which is the great equalizer, we're all lost, but for the grace of God. So at this point, the temptation, I think, for many of us who read this parable is to kind of retreat into an abstract reading or a metaphorical reading and to say, well, this gospel is not literally about money. It's really about my attitude towards money. It's about my heart. Money itself is neither here nor there. Money itself is morally neutral. Well, yes, that is true objectively. And no, the fact is, how many for us is money actually morally neutral, right? It's a squirmy fact that Jesus talks about money and possessions more than any other thing in the Bible. There are about 500 verses on prayer in Scripture. There's about 200 verses on faith. Do you know how many verses there are on money or wealth or finances? 2,000 plus. This is not just our modern American problem, friends. This is something that's been in our hearts from the beginning. Something that Jesus knew we needed to pay attention to. It reminds me, like, what I think, this is my personal opinion, those obnoxious billboards that are on your way to DIA now, that are like huge flashing lights, almost blinding at nighttime. You know, you can't miss whatever message they're trying to tell you. I feel like this is one of those billboards in the Bible, Jesus saying, pay attention to money, pay attention to wealth, this matters. There's something about money that can distort us, something that can make us defensive, something that makes it very hard for us to hear the gospel and all of its risky radicalness. Something about the allure of money grabs hold of us, and it does not easily let us go. And again, it's been around since the beginning. It speaks to this universal pull that money and stuff and clinging to what is quote-unquote mine has on our heads and on our hearts. And it's not just that having a lot of money is detrimental. Because whether we have a lot of money or not, how many of us obsess or worry about money? Will there be enough money? Will we be able to pay the bills this month, right? It goes both ways. You can have an abundance of it or a lack of it, and it still consumes our hearts and minds with worry. It draws us into ourselves and away from God and one another. I wish it weren't the case. And it may not be the case for you, but it is for me. So what I've been thinking about this week is this phrase of what it means to be rich toward God. Some people in our world would call me very rich. Other people would call me middle class. I don't think anybody would call me poor. But I wonder who might say, is Ann Scalfaro rich toward God? What might that mean for my life? It's an inspiring phrase, but I wonder, what does a heart and a lifestyle and a home and a bank account that is rich toward God look like? Maybe, if we can infer from the reading today, it means guarding against greed instead of obsessing over fairness. Maybe it means holding our mortality closer than we want to. Maybe it means asking hard questions about what makes us feel secure or insecure. Maybe it means acknowledging that even our hard-earned, well-earned, self-earned wealth comes from God and belongs to God. And even when we feel like we have worked hard for what we have to remember that it is God who gave us the gifts and the skills and the ability to work hard for what we have. And ultimately, maybe it means prioritizing human connectedness over personal gain or asset management. Maybe it means dialoguing more with God rather than monologuing with ourselves, or giving attention to our stock market app, or talking with our financial advisor every time the market does this or this. Maybe it means focusing on someone or something in front of us that gives our life a deeper meaning than what money can. In the parable, Jesus tells us God confronts this rich landowner with really kind of chilling words, saying, "This very night your life is being demanded of you." Are we listening to that? What would we change about our lives if we really believed that? What would we do differently if we believed that God does in fact demand our lives from us every single day? That the call to take up our cross and follow Jesus is an hourly and a daily and a weekly commitment, but it's also a dollar-by-dollar commitment and call. If this is in fact true of us, what should we do with our money? What should we leave behind? What should we carry forward? And what should we give away? How can we be bold in thinking about what it means to be rich toward God and giving back to God what God has already given to us? And this is the image that I came up with this week to help me contemplate this. Imagine two barns. You've got some land, and they're both equally sized. One barn is full of all of the stuff you love. It could be sentimental items. It could be neat gadgets in the kitchen or electronics that you like. Those things at your favorite store that you're waiting to go on sale, maybe what's sitting in your Amazon cart right now. Things that, you've accumulated over the years, furniture, mementos, things that your kids gave you, but stuff, the stuff of life. In the other barn, imagine it full of people. Your kids are there and your grandkids, your family, your friends. There's also a lot of other people there too. There's people who are fighting for their lives on an ICU bed, trying to survive gunshot wounds. There's people who are trying to live through traumatic situations in their lives. People who have been ignored in our society. People who are down and out on their luck. People who you've seen walking around your neighborhood but never quite noticed, and even people whose stories you've seen on the news but who you don't know personally. They're all in this barn too. When you look at those two barns, which one is more valuable? Which can you afford to lose? Which would you do anything to save? Now, I think the answer is probably pretty easy for us, right? The people. We would save the people. And there's the rub. We say that we'd save the people, but a lot of times we save our stuff. I do. I'm not proud of it, but I do. We all want to do the right thing in our hearts, but the pull towards self and wealth is strong. Every decision we contemplate, every purchase we make, every policy we advocate for, every leader we vote for, every dollar we spend, every word we speak out of our minds or post on Facebook, they all support one of these barns. The barn of stuff or the barn of people. The barn of self or the barn of God. The barn of greed or the barn of love. It's a hard reality. But as Eugene Peterson puts it in the message, we have to ask ourselves, is our barn filled with self, or is it filled with God? Only we can answer that question for ourselves. May we do the hard work to wrestle with whatever answer that is for us. Amen.